Girl, come on in here and pull up a seat. No, not that little stiff back chair. Get over here on the chaise lounge with me. Put your feet up. Go on, I mean it. Auntie's got a story for you tonight that is going to make that little spirit of yours simmer. You know how I always tell you that the devil works hard, but a woman who's been played for a fool works harder. Well, tonight you're going to learn that the devil ain't got nothing on a woman who is not only scorned, but who also had the foresight to hire a lawyer who was an absolute viper in a Brioni suit about 20 years ago. This ain't just spilling tea, baby. This is pouring the whole damn pot over a bonfire. This story is about a queen, a woman named Brenda Johnson. And when I tell you Brenda was the salt of the earth, I need you to understand what I mean. 55 years old, but the kind of 55 that makes 30-year-olds ask for her skincare routine. Skin like warm honey, a smile that could calm a crying baby, and a heart so big you'd think she didn't have room for anything else in her chest. She was the kind of woman who remembered the name of your cat, your mama's favorite flower, and your anniversary, and would send a little something for all three. She'd send soup to a sick neighbor and a check to her old high school scholarship fund without ever putting her name on it. She was grace. She was class. She was what a grown woman is supposed to be. But don't let that sweet tea and Chanel know. If I fool you for 1 second, baby, underneath that warm, motherly exterior, that cashmere sweater set was a mind as sharp as a shard of glass from a shattered champagne flute. Brenda was a titan, a shark in a St. John knit suit. She could walk into a boardroom full of puffed up peacocks and pinstripes, and with a few quiet questions, she could fillet them, debone them, and have them thanking her for the experience. She saw angles nobody else saw. She had a gut instinct for business that was a gift from God himself. She saw the city not as a collection of buildings, but as a living, breathing organism. And she knew exactly where its arteries were, where it was growing, and where the dead tissue needed to be cut away to make room for new life. And it all came to a head at the most spectacular, most audacious, most downright disrespectful moment of her life, her 30th wedding anniversary party. A party she threw for her husband, Robert. Oh, Lord, we got to talk about Robert. On the surface, Robert was the man. You know the type. Tall, handsome, in that silver fox way that makes women of a certain age lose their composure. He wore a tailored suit like he was born in it, and had a smile so charming it could talk a bird right out of the sky and into his hand. He was the public face of their real estate empire, B&R Holdings. The R in B&R. He was the one on the cover of City Wealth magazine, shaking hands with the mayor, kissing babies at charity events, and accepting awards with a humble, practiced tear in his eye. He was the rainmaker, the glad-hander, the closer. But the B, honey, the B was for Brenda, and the B was for brains. The B was for backbone. The B was for built this whole damn thing from the ground up while he was practicing his golf swing. The B was for bankroll. See, Brenda was the one with the vision. They met when she was a paralegal with a ferocious ambition, and he was a junior real estate agent with a lot of charm and not much else. He was selling cookie-cutter suburban houses, and she was already studying zoning laws in her spare time, dreaming of changing the city's skyline. She was the one who could stand in a field of weeds and broken down warehouses in a forgotten part of town and see luxury lofts with rooftop gardens and organic grocery stores on the ground floor. She was the one who could read a 300-page zoning proposal and find the one sentence, the one loophole that would make them millions. Robert was the show pony. Brenda was the one who owned the whole stable, trained the horses, and shoveled the manure. And for 30 years, she was content to let him have the spotlight. She loved him, you see. Or at least she loved the man she had married, the ambitious young man she thought she was building a life with, not for. She believed in the fairy tale of partnership, that his success was her success. She was from that generation of women who were taught to stand behind their man, to be the wind beneath his wings. She just never imagined he'd use those wings to fly right into another woman's bed. It was Brenda who found their first property, a dilapidated duplex that smelled to cat pee and regret. Robert had taken one look at it and said, "Honey, no. This is a tear down." But Brenda had walked the creaking floors, looked at the good bones, and checked the city's 5-year development plan. She knew a new transit line was slated to go in 3 blocks away. She had to use her own savings, the money she put away from her paralegal job, to make the down payment because he refused to risk his commission check. 6 months and a lot of her own sweat equity later, they flipped it for triple what they paid. That was the seed money for B&R Holdings, and that became the pattern. She'd find the gym, do the math, create the strategy, and he would put on a suit, charm the banker she had already prepped, and take the credit. In the early days, it felt like a partnership. It felt like they were a team. So, for their 30th anniversary, she decided to pull out all the stops. We're not talking a little backyard barbecue, baby. We are talking a gala. At their sprawling mansion in the hills, a palace of glass and white stone that Brenda herself had sketched on a napkin years ago and brought to life. She'd had the garden completely re-landscaped with 10,000 white roses. Her favorite, a string quartet, was playing Vivaldi by the infinity pool, which was designed to look like it spilled right into the glittering carpet of city lights below. There was a champagne tower that was taller than me, bubbling over with Dom Perignon. And the guest list was a who's who of power and influence. The mayor was there nursing a scotch. CEOs of rival companies were there sipping her expensive liquor and trying not to look jealous of the sheer scale of it all. All their friends, their family, every person who had witnessed their 30-year journey from a cramped apartment to this mountaintop palace. Brenda was a vision. She had spent the afternoon getting ready, a slow, luxurious ritual. She'd had a long bath, the water scented with jasmine oil. Her glam squad had come to the house, and they'd styled her hair into a sophisticated updo, with a few soft tendrils framing her face. She was wearing a custom-made gown by Oscar de la Renta in a deep sapphire blue that clung to her curves like a second skin. It was the color of a twilight sky, shimmering with tiny hand-sewn crystals that caught the light like stars. Around her neck was the Star Brenda, a ridiculous pear-shaped diamond necklace Robert had given her for their 25th anniversary. Bought, of course, with money she had made. The irony is so thick you could choke on it now, but at the time it was her most prized possession. A symbol, she thought, of their shared success. She was floating through that party, her heart just full to bursting. 30 years. They had built a dynasty together. They had made it. She'd catch his eye across the room, and he'd give her that smile, that $1 million smile, and raise his glass. And she felt like the luckiest woman in the world. She'd stop to chat with the mayor about a new downtown revitalization project, then pivot to discuss modern art with the wife of a tech billionaire, all with an effortless grace that made everyone feel like they were the most important person in the room. The pinnacle of the evening was meant to be Robert's speech. The catering staff, all in crisp white jackets, dimmed the lights on cue. A single warm spotlight hit the custom-built stage in the center of the grand ballroom. Robert, looking like a movie star in his Tom Ford tuxedo, walked up to the microphone. The clinking of glasses and the low hum of conversation faded into a reverent silence. He started off beautifully. I mean, the man had a way with words. I'll give the devil his due. He talked about the day he met Brenda, how she was a fiery young paralegal with dreams bigger than the city they lived in. She had this spark in her eye, he said, his voice thick with what sounded like genuine emotion. A fire that told me she was either going to build an empire or burn the world down trying. I just knew I wanted to be there to see which one it was. The crowd chuckled warmly. Brenda, standing near the front with her best friend Simone, put a hand over her heart, just beaming at him. She felt so proud, so loved. Simone, ever the pragmatist but a romantic at heart, whispered in her ear, 30 years, B. Look what you two built. And Brenda's heart swelled. He talked about their early years, eating ramen noodles on the floor of their tiny apartment, poring over blueprints with a flashlight when the power got cut off because they put all their money into a down payment on their first fixer-upper. He painted a picture of a partnership, a beautiful struggle that they had won together. He even told the story of their first big deal, that dilapidated duplex she'd found. He conveniently left out the part where he thought it was a money pit and wanted to pass, and she had to use her own small savings from before they were married to make the down payment herself, because she just knew it was a diamond in the rough. He told the story as if it were a shared risk, a joint leap of faith, and she let him. She smiled and let him have his story. He had the whole room, including Brenda, misty-eyed. He raised his glass. To Brenda, he said, his voice booming with sincerity. My rock, my partner, my compass, my everything. For 30 incredible years. I would be nothing without you. The room erupted in applause. People were on their feet, cheering, whistling. Simone squeezed Brenda's arm. See, he loves you, she whispered. Brenda's eyes were shining with happy tears. She thought, this is it. This is the perfect moment. All the work, all the sacrifices, it was all worth it for this. The validation, the public acknowledgement, it felt like a warm blanket. It even soothed a deep, quiet ache she rarely acknowledged. The ache of their childlessness. They had tried for years. There had been doctors and procedures and quiet tears in the middle of the night. Eventually, the doctors told them it wasn't meant to be. Brenda had poured all that maternal nurturing energy into her business, into her friends, into her marriage. And Robert had always said, you and me, baby, that's all I need. We'll build our legacy another way. Standing there, hearing him praise her, she believed him. But then the applause started to die down, and Robert held up a hand. He didn't lower the microphone. His charming smile shifted. It was subtle, but to a woman who had studied that face for 3 decades, it was a seismic event. The corners of his mouth tightened, and his eyes took on a gleam that wasn't warmth. It was smug, a self-satisfied cruelty she had never seen directed at her before. Brenda has been a wonderful partner for 30 years, he said again, his voice changing, getting louder, more performative, like a master of ceremonies at a circus. But tonight is a night for honesty, for truth. And I can't stand up here and be a liar anymore. Tonight I want to be an honest man. A confused murmur rippled through the crowd like a cold wind. Brenda's smile faltered, then froze on her face. Her blood ran cold. The warmth of the champagne in her stomach turned to a block of ice. What was he talking about? Her heart, which had been floating on a cloud of bliss, suddenly started to beat a little too fast, a cold, heavy knot forming in the pit of her stomach. This wasn't part of the script. This wasn't the loving tribute she was expecting. Simone's hand on her arm went from a comforting squeeze to a tense grip. What is he doing? Simone hissed under her breath, her eyes wide with alarm. Robert turned his head to the side of the stage, into the shadows where the catering staff was waiting. Vanessa, honey, could you come up here, please? Bring the kids. Time didn't just slow down, girl. It shattered. Every head in that room, all 200 of them, turned in unison. And from the shadows, a woman emerged. Brenda recognized her instantly. Vanessa, a junior marketing associate from their firm. A woman who was always just a little too complimentary, whose smile was always a little too bright when Brenda was around. A woman Brenda had personally mentored, thinking she was helping a young go-getter. She was maybe 38, 40 at the most, pretty in a sharp, hungry kind of way. She was wearing a blood-red dress that was a little too tight, a little too loud, a little too much for the elegant affair. It was a dress designed to make a statement, and that statement was, "I've arrived," and it screamed, "Look at me." She wasn't alone. She was holding the hands of two teenagers, a boy and a girl, both with Robert's eyes and jawline. They looked to be about 16, 17. The boy was a carbon copy of a young Robert, all lanky limbs and defiant posture. The girl had Robert's chin, but her mother's wary eyes. They were terrified, their eyes darting around the sea of confused, staring faces, clinging to their mother's hands as if for dear life. They walked onto the stage. The woman, Vanessa, moved to Robert's side, and he, without missing a single beat, without even a glance at his wife of 30 years, wrapped a proprietary arm around Vanessa's waist and pulled her flush against his side. He kissed her on the cheek, a loud, performative smack that echoed in the dead silence. The silence in that room was so complete, so absolute. You could have heard a diamond drop on the marble floor. It was the sound of 200 jaws hitting the floor at the same time. It was the sound of a legacy imploding. It was the sound of 30 years of shared history being erased with one gesture. Brenda just stood there, frozen. The sapphire dress suddenly felt like a costume for a fool. The Star of Brenda necklace felt like a slave's collar, heavy and cold against her skin. The whole night, the whole 30 years, felt like a movie playing in front of her. And she had just realized she was the villain in her own story. The 10,000 white roses in the garden suddenly seemed funereal. The champagne tasted like acid in the back of her throat. Robert beamed, a triumphant, sickening smile on his face. He was high on the drama of it all. He gestured to the woman and the two children as if he were presenting a new luxury development. "Everyone," he announced, his voice booming through the speakers, "I want to introduce you to my true family. The family I was meant to have. This is Vanessa, the love of my life for the past 18 years. And these are my children, Jordan and Jasmine." The audacity. The sheer, unmitigated, trifling, gutter-level audacity to do this here tonight. In her home, the one she designed in front of everyone they knew. It wasn't just a betrayal, it was a public execution. He was trying to assassinate her character, her legacy, her entire life in one spectacular, humiliating blaze of glory. He was weaponizing their infertility, the one deep wound they had supposedly shared. And twisting the knife in public, he wanted to paint her as the old, washed-up, barren wife, the past. And this Vanessa in her cheap red dress as the vibrant, fertile future. He wanted to force everyone's hand to make it impossible for them to choose Brenda's side without looking like they were standing in the way of his newfound honesty. Brenda could feel the eyes on her, not admiration anymore, pity, morbid curiosity, her so-called friends, her business partners, the mayor, all of them staring, their faces a mixture of horror and fascination. She saw a few people, the younger ones, already pulling out their phones, the little red recording lights blinking like evil little eyes in the dim light. Her world, her beautiful, carefully constructed world, was shattering in real time, and it was being live-streamed for social media. She felt a single tear prick her eye. Just one. She felt the heat of humiliation rise up her neck, a deep, burning flush she knew everyone could see against her honey skin. She wanted to run, to scream, to throw her champagne glass, to crumble into a million pieces on the floor and let the earth swallow her whole. The sound in the room was a low buzz, a horrified murmur that felt like a physical assault. But then, as that single tear escaped and traced a hot path down her cheek, something else happened. It was like that tear was a release valve. It washed away the shock. It washed away the hurt. It washed away the 30 years of love and misplaced loyalty. And what was left behind was cold. It was a cold, hard, dear diamond-sharp clarity. And in that clarity, a memory surfaced. Not just a memory, a full-blown movie playing in the theater of her mind. Let me take you back, baby. Back about 20 years. B&R Holdings was doing well, but it wasn't the empire it was today. And Robert had a problem. He liked the thrill, the risk, but he wasn't a businessman who took calculated risks like Brenda. No, he liked the cheap thrills, the ponies at Santa Anita, the high-stakes poker games in smoky back rooms with men whose names you didn't want to know. And for a while, he was losing. Badly. Brenda remembered the late nights, him coming home smelling of stale cigar smoke and desperation, the frantic, whispered phone calls he'd take in the other room. Then came the day 2 men in cheap suits and bad attitudes showed up at their office asking for Mr. Johnson and refusing to leave. They didn't look like clients. They looked like thugs from a bad movie. And they sat in her beautiful lobby, scaring off her receptionist until she had to personally ask them to leave. They had just laughed. "We'll be back," one of them had said, his eyes cold and flat. Robert had gotten in deep with some very unsavory characters. Loan sharks. He had leveraged 3 of their prime commercial properties without her knowledge. They were on the verge of losing everything. The business, the house they had just built, all of it. Robert had finally broken down. He came to her one night, a weeping, terrified mess. He confessed everything, snot and tears running down his face, admitting he'd nearly ruined them with his arrogance and his addiction to the gamble. He'd mortgaged properties behind her back, forged her signature on loan documents. He was a cornered rat. And Brenda, ever the strategist, ever the fixer, didn't scream or cry. Her mind went to work. She made him sit down and write down every single debt, every single name. Then she sent him to bed and stayed up all night. A bottle of bourbon and a legal pad, her only companions. By dawn, she had a plan. It wasn't just a plan to pay off the debt. It was a plan for the future. An insurance policy she didn't even know she would one day need to cash. The next morning, she called their lawyer, a man named David Chin, a shark who was fiercely loyal to her. She'd been the one to find him and put him on retainer years ago, recognizing his brilliance when he was just a junior associate at a big firm. She met him at his office, a sleek, minimalist space downtown. She laid out the situation, her voice never wavering. He listened, his face impassive. Then he said, "There's a way to protect the core assets, Brenda, but it's drastic, and it puts all the power in your hands." She had looked him dead in the eye and said, "Do it." David had explained the mechanism. "We'll create an irrevocable trust. We transfer every asset, the holding company, all real estate, all liquid accounts, into the trust. You will be the sole trustee. Robert will sign over his interest as part of a debt restructuring and asset protection strategy. He will legally own nothing. He will be an employee, a handsomely paid one, but an employee nonetheless. In his panic, he will see it as a shield. He won't see it as a cage." She had him draw up the papers. She presented it to Robert as a way to shield their assets from the creditors. "We'll put everything in my name, temporarily," she had said, her voice calm and reassuring as he paced the floor in a panic. "The company, the properties, the accounts. We'll structure it as an irrevocable trust. On paper, you'll own nothing. They can't take what you don't have. Once this blows over, we can figure out how to restructure." He was so scared, so desperate, he would have signed his own soul away to the devil. Brenda remembered sitting across from him at their big mahogany desk in the study. She remembered the slick, heavy feel of the vellum paper, the weight of the Mont Blanc fountain pen in her hand as she passed it to him. She remembered the notary she'd called for an emergency appointment, a woman with a bored expression who just wanted to get her stamp on the paper and go home. And she remembered watching Robert's hand tremble as he signed page after page, his eyes glazed over with fear and pathetic relief. He barely even read what he was signing. He just saw a lifeline and he grabbed it. He saw the word trust and thought it meant safety. He didn't understand. It meant the assets were now entrusted to her. But here's the thing about that paperwork, honey. The word temporarily was just for Robert's ears. There was no restructure plan. It was an ironclad, legally binding transfer of all assets, holdings, and properties into the Brenda Johnson Trust, a trust for which Brenda was the sole trustee and beneficiary. In the eyes of the law for the last 2 decades, Robert Johnson owned nothing but the clothes on his back and the watch on his wrist. And Brenda, God bless her strategic, forward-thinking heart, had quietly renewed that trust with her lawyer every 5 years like clockwork. She had the receipts. Oh, did she have the receipts? The original signed documents, the annual renewals, all locked away in a safe deposit box at a bank downtown, waiting for a rainy day. And as Brenda stood there in her grand ballroom, it started to pour. She looked at Robert on that stage with his side chick of 18 years. 18 years. The math clicked in her head with the cold, hard certainty of a jail cell door slamming shut. That meant he started cheating on her just 2 years after she saved his entire ass from ruin. The man she had pulled from the fire had spent the next 2 decades dousing her in gasoline, waiting for the right moment to strike a match. The affair had begun right around the time the business really started to take off again, after she had cleaned up his mess and set them back on a path to prosperity. He'd taken her rescue not as a gift of grace, but as his due, and he had forgotten. In his arrogance, in his comfort, in the security of the empire she had continued to build while he was off playing house, he had forgotten that he was a king with no kingdom, a CEO with no company, a husband with no house. The single tear on Brenda's cheek dried. The heat of humiliation was replaced by an arctic calm. The hurt was gone, cauterized by a pure, unadulterated rage that was so cold it felt like peace. She looked at Robert, really looked at him. He was still talking, blathering on about wanting his children to know their father, about his right to happiness. He was trying to get the crowd on his side, spinning a narrative of a loveless marriage and a brave man following his heart. A few people, the sentimental fools, were starting to clap hesitantly, the ones who valued a cheap, dramatic performance of honesty over 30 years of loyalty. Brenda let them clap. She let the sound echo in the cavernous room. She let Robert soak it in, that final fleeting moment of triumph. She watched Vanessa smile, a smug, victorious little smirk. She waited for the applause to die down to an awkward smattering, and then to a thick, expectant silence. And then she moved. She didn't storm the stage. She didn't run. She glided. Every eye in the room snapped back to her. The click-clack-click of her Louboutin heels on the marble floor was the only sound. It was the sound of a queen approaching her throne. It was the sound of a death knell. It was the metronome of karma, ticking off the final seconds of his old life. She walked up the small steps to the stage, her sapphire dress shimmering under the spotlight like royal armor. She didn't even glance at Vanessa, who flinched back as if Brenda was on fire. She didn't look at the children, who looked like they wanted the floor to swallow them whole. She walked right up to Robert. He stopped talking mid-sentence, a flicker of uncertainty finally crossing his face. "Brenda," he started, a warning in his tone, trying to reclaim control. She gave him a smile. And child, it was the most terrifying smile anyone in that room had ever seen. It was brilliant. It was dazzling. And it did not reach her eyes. Her eyes were chips of ice. She gently, almost tenderly, took the microphone from his hand. His fingers were limp. He let it go without a fight. The transfer of power was seamless. It was electric. The entire room felt it. She turned to face the crowd. She took a deep theatrical breath, letting the silence stretch, letting the tension build until it was a living thing in the room, thick and suffocating. "Wow," she said, her voice smooth as silk but with an edge of steel that cut right through the air. It carried through the speakers, filling every corner of the house. "Just wow." She let out a low, throaty chuckle that was devoid of any humor. "Robert, my love," she said, turning her head to look at him, her eyes raking over him with the kind of disdain a queen might show a court jester who told a bad joke. "You are absolutely right. A 30th anniversary is a time for honesty. So I want to thank you. Truly. Thank you for being so transparent, for showing everyone here tonight, our friends, our family, our business partners, exactly who you are." Her eyes swept over the crowd, landing for a moment on the mayor, on a key investor, then back on him. Robert's smugness was gone, replaced by a wary confusion. He didn't know where this was going, but his instincts were screaming at him that it wasn't going to be the victory lap he'd planned. Brenda's gaze drifted to Vanessa, who was clutching Robert's arm like a life raft, her triumphant smile now looking brittle and uncertain. "And thank you," Brenda continued, her voice dripping with a sweetness more poisonous than arsenic, "for introducing us to Vanessa." She looked the woman up and down, a dismissive flick of her eyes over the cheap red dress. Red is a bold choice, very declarative, and these two beautiful children. She gave the teenagers a brief, pitying glance. "This must be very confusing for you. I'm sorry you had to be part of this performance." She turned back to Robert, her smile tightening until it was a predatory line. "You see, honesty is a two-way street, darling. And while you were busy building your true family," she paused, letting the words hang in the air, heavy with insinuation, "I was busy building this one." She made a sweeping gesture with her free hand, indicating the magnificent house, the successful guests, the entire empire they were standing in the middle of. "You talk about honesty," she said, her voice dropping, becoming more intimate, more dangerous. "So let's talk about it. Let's talk about 20 years ago. Do you remember, honey, when your little hobby with the racehorses and the poker tables nearly cost us everything?" A collective gasp went through the crowd. This was a secret buried deep. Robert's face went from confused to pale, then to the color of ash. He knew. In that instant, he remembered. The fog of arrogance cleared, and he saw the abyss opening up beneath him. His eyes widened in pure, unadulterated horror. He looked like he'd just seen a ghost, and, in a way, he had. The ghost of a decision he made 2 decades ago come back to haunt him. "I remember," Brenda said, her voice a cold whisper that still carried through the mic like a scream. "I remember the creditors calling our house at 3 a.m. I remember you on your knees, weeping in my arms, terrified that you had destroyed us." "Do you remember that, Robert? Do you remember signing a little stack of papers to protect our assets? Papers you were so relieved to sign? Papers you probably forgot about the moment the ink was dry and you realized I had saved you?" He just stared at her, speechless, his mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "I do," Brenda said, her voice ringing with power and clarity. "And I also remember that you signed those papers without reading them. But I read them. My lawyer, David Chin, read them, and the notary stamped them. That little stack of papers wasn't temporary. It was an irrevocable transfer of assets. It gave me sole, indisputable, 100% ownership of B&R Holdings, of every property, of every stock, of every account." She leaned into the microphone, her voice now a clear, ringing bell of judgment. "Of this house, of the car you drove here tonight, of the Tom Ford tuxedo on your back, and the watch on your wrist that I bought you for your last birthday. She let that bomb drop. The sound in the room was a physical thing, a whoosh of air as 200 people gasped at once. Robert looked like he'd been shot. Vanessa's hand dropped from his arm as if it were on fire. Her face was a mask of disbelief and dawning, sickening horror. She had hitched her wagon to a star, only to find out it was a broke, falling meteor. The future she had been smirking about just moments ago had evaporated. Her eyes darted from Robert's ashen face to Brenda's cold, triumphant one, and the calculation was visible. She had gambled and lost spectacularly. Brenda wasn't finished. Oh no, honey, she was just getting to the grand finale. She turned slightly, a queen addressing her court, and spoke directly to the cluster of shocked-looking men in suits who represented their biggest investors and partners. So, as the sole owner and chairwoman of, well, I guess we'll be calling it B Enterprises from now on, my first official act of business for the evening is to announce a change in leadership. I'm accepting the immediate and permanent resignation of Robert Johnson. Robert, you're fired. If the last announcement was a bomb, this was the nuclear fallout. Fired. In front of the mayor. In front of his rivals. In front of his mistress and his illegitimate children. It was a public execution of the highest order. Robert finally found his voice, a pathetic, strangled squawk. Brenda, you can't, he sputtered, reaching for the microphone like a drowning man. Brenda pulled it back smoothly. Oh, I can. And I have, she said, her voice like ice. She then looked past him into the crowd, and her eyes found a large, imposing man in a black suit standing near the door. Marcus, her head of security for 20 years, a man whose loyalty was to the person who signed his checks. Her checks. She didn't need to raise her voice. Marcus, she said calmly into the mic. Marcus's head snapped up. He nodded once, his expression grim and professional. Marcus, Brenda said, her voice ringing with absolute finality. Would you please be so kind as to escort Mr. Johnson and his guests off my property? He appears to be trespassing. That was it. The final nail in the coffin, the epitaph on the tombstone of his life. Marcus and another security guard started moving through the stunned crowd, which parted for them like the Red Sea. Robert was still sputtering, his face a grotesque mixture of rage and panic. Brenda, this is our home. We built this together. For God's sake, after 30 years, you can't do this. Brenda just looked at him, her expression utterly blank. I can, she said, not into the mic, but just to him, a final private execution. And I am. You made your choice, Robert, 18 years ago. Now live with it. Marcus reached the stage. He put a firm, non-negotiable hand on Robert's arm. Sir, you need to come with me. Now. Robert tried to shake him off, but Marcus was built like a brick building. The fight went out of Robert in an instant. All the swagger, all the charm, all the arrogance drained out of him, leaving behind a shrunken, defeated old man. Vanessa, realizing the gravy train had not only left the station, but had derailed, burst into flames, and plunged off a cliff, grabbed her two shell-shocked children by the hands. She scurried off the stage without a word, her red dress now looking cheap and pathetic. She didn't even look back at the man she had stood by so proudly just minutes before. She was a rat fleeing a sinking ship. A ship, it turned out, that had been sunk for 2 decades. The security guards led a dazed Robert and his new broke family through the crowd of silent, staring guests. They walked past the champagne tower, past the string quartet that had stopped playing, past the 10,000 white roses Brenda had ordered. They walked right out the massive front door of the house that was no longer his and into the cold, dark night. The heavy oak doors closed behind them with a final booming thud that echoed like a gunshot. Silence, utter and complete. Brenda stood alone on the stage, bathed in the single spotlight. She looked out at the faces of her guests. She saw the shock, the awe, the dawning respect. There was no pity in their eyes now. None at all. Only the raw recognition of power. Her best friend Simone was looking at her with a mixture of horror and fierce, unadulterated pride, tears streaming down her own face now. Brenda cleared her throat, and the sound made several people jump. She raised the microphone one last time. A small, genuine smile finally touched her lips. "Well," she said, her voice warm again, as if the last 10 minutes had been a strange dream. "That was unexpected." She let out a little laugh, a real one this time, and it was like a spell was broken. A few people laughed with her, a nervous, giddy sound. Then someone started clapping. A slow, deliberate clap. It was the mayor. He looked at her with newfound respect. Then another person joined, and another, until the entire room was filled with a thunderous, genuine applause, far louder and more heartfelt than the one they had given Robert. It was an ovation for her. "The bar is still open," Brenda announced, her voice full of light, "and the pastry chef has just put out a croquembouche that is to die for. Please, everyone, enjoy the party. After all," she added with a wicked twinkle in her eye, "I paid for it." And that, honey, is how you turn a public humiliation into a coronation. Simone was the first to reach her, wrapping her in a fierce hug. "You absolute queen," Simone whispered in her ear. "I have never been prouder." The mayor came up next, shaking her hand firmly. "Brenda," he said, his voice low and serious. "Anytime B Enterprises needs anything from the city, my door is always open. You have my full support." The message was clear. The power had shifted, and everyone knew it. The days that followed were a storm, but Brenda was the eye of it, calm and immovable. Robert called 100 times. He begged, he threatened, he cried. He sent his lawyers, who came in with blustering threats about marital assets and shared property. Brenda sent David Chin, who calmly slid one single document across the table in their first and only meeting. Robert's lawyers, a pair of slick guys from a downtown firm, took one look at the ironclad trust agreement, saw their client's trembling signature on the bottom, noted the dates of the notarized 5-year renewals, and their faces fell. David Chin let them read it, then read it again. "As you can see," David said, his voice as smooth as polished granite, "Mr. Johnson has been an employee of the Brenda Johnson Trust for 2 decades. He has been compensated generously. My client is prepared to offer a severance package out of the goodness of her heart. I suggest you advise him to take it." They quietly advised Robert to take the first pitiful settlement offer she made. It was just enough for a down payment on a 3-bedroom condo and a used car. A final small act of mercy, or maybe a final twist of the knife, a constant reminder of the wealth he had so arrogantly thrown away. Brenda, meanwhile, thrived. She officially rebranded the company to B Enterprises. Far from being scared off, her investors were impressed by her decisiveness and ruthlessness. The value of the company soared. Everyone in the business world knew who the real genius was now. They had seen it with their own eyes. The story of the anniversary party became a legend in their city, whispered in boardrooms and at cocktail parties, a cautionary tale for trifling men everywhere. She sold the mansion. Too many ghosts. She bought a stunning penthouse apartment in the heart of the city, a glass jewel box in the sky with a view that made you feel like you were on top of the world, because she was. She filled it not with things to impress other people, but with things she loved. Modern art, shelves of books, a grand piano she was finally learning to play. She traveled. She went to Paris and bought herself a new diamond necklace, a modern, elegant piece from a jeweler on the Place Vendôme, one that wasn't tainted by lies. She went to Italy and had a torrid, wonderful affair with a handsome art historian named Alessandro, who was 20 years her junior, and worshipped the ground she walked on. He taught her about Caravaggio and showed her hidden courtyards in Rome. For the first time in a long time, she felt desired not for her money or her power, but for herself. She glowed up, baby. She got her life back, a life that was fully and completely her own, on her own terms. And Robert, the last Brenda heard, he and Vanessa were living in that condo he bought with Brenda's pity money, across town in a less fashionable neighborhood. The money ran out fast. The teenage kids, humiliated at school and angry at the world, resented him for the public spectacle he had created. And Vanessa, who had signed up to be the wife of a real estate mogul, was not enjoying her new life as the partner of an unemployed, disgraced man whose greatest asset was his memory of a life he once had. The romance built on deceit couldn't survive the harsh reality of budgets and bills. Karma, as you know, baby girl, is a patient, thorough woman, and she always collects. About a year later, Brenda was in the back of her chauffeured Maybach heading to a charity gala where she was the guest of honor. It was raining. As the car stopped at a red light, she glanced out the window and she saw him, Robert, standing at a bus stop without an umbrella, his shoulders hunched against the downpour. His suit was ill-fitting. His silver hair was thinning. He looked old. He looked defeated. He looked small. He didn't see her. He was just a man in the rain, waiting for a bus, while she sat in her palace on wheels on her way to be celebrated. Their eyes never met. For a fleeting second, she felt a ghost of a memory. The ambitious young man she'd once loved. But it was just that, a ghost. The man at the bus stop was a stranger. The light turned green and the car pulled away, leaving him behind in the rain-streaked darkness. She didn't feel hatred. She didn't feel sadness. She felt nothing at all. He was just a stranger at a bus stop. She smoothed down the silk of her gown, checked her lipstick in her compact mirror, and thought about the speech she was about to give. The future was waiting. So let that be a lesson to you, my dear niece. Fall in love, build a life, share your heart. But for the love of all that is holy, always read the fine print. Always have an exit strategy. And always keep your own name on the deed. Your auntie told you so. Now pass me that bottle. This story has made me thirsty.